This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner Trisonic. For a full range of audio, media buying, and creative services, including podcast production, check out trisonic.co.uk.
You're not visible on those platforms and you potentially risk being discovered by people in the future. You probably risk your information not being surfaced in the wider AI ecosystem.
Welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin. We've entered a new era of search. Google's dominance is being challenged left and right. Social platforms like TikTok and Reddit were already upending traditional means of information and product discovery, and the rise of large language models for search has created an entirely new and nascent market. Google itself is leaning into the new era with its Gemini model and AI mode search experience, which launched in the UK last month. But there's also OpenAI's ChatGPT, Perplexity's Sonar, and many others. Due to the nature of these models giving conversational, descriptive responses to queries, users are clicking on a lot fewer links. Google denies this without providing hard evidence to the contrary, but publishers and brands that I've spoken with have reported sharp declines in referral traffic. So how will they navigate the future of the web? Paul Bland is the Chief Digital Officer at Havas Media Network UK. The media agency last week launched a new tool aimed at helping brands get more visibility over how and when they show up in AI search, and ideally then optimize that behavior, much like SEO or search engine optimization. That development of generative engine optimization, or GEO, brings with it a whole host of questions and uncertainties, but Bland is confident that this is the direction the ad industry is moving. This is a big topic, and last week I wrote an article that unpacks a diversity of views on the subject, in particular about how publishers are facing an existential crisis as their relationship with Google transforms. Do give it a read on the Media Leader. But for now, this is my conversation with Paul Bland. I hope you enjoy. Paul Bland, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jack, how's it going? Nice to speak to you.
It's great to speak with you as well. You've been at Havas Media Network now for 4.5 years. I'm curious, how would you describe how things have changed over that time with regard to how brands have needed to consider the search market?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say there's been a pretty rapid change in the last 6 to 18 months as a result of AI, large language models, way people discover information is shifting. Such has always been fast moving. There's always been changes and shifted in the landscape. But I think in most recent months, what we're seeing is a real step change and shift to how search can be considered in general, actually. So I'm going to say from 4 years ago, a lot, but even in the last few months, it is genuinely shifting at a rapid pace.
What would you say are the key questions you tend to get from clients with regard to search, and especially within that AI search?
I think at the moment, because it's so fast moving and it's also shifting in terms of the number of platforms, in terms of the metrics, in terms of the data, what we're getting is a lot of questions around understanding more than anything. So basically, if you look at the wider context of the market, I think ChatGPT has gone from next to no traffic to something like, I think the latest stats is 700 million people are using it on a weekly basis now. So that's 1 in 10 people on this planet weekly are using ChatGPT. And I think in the UK, I think it's about 25% of people monthly using it. The clients are naturally keen to understand, like, what's my visibility like on these platforms? How do I rank within these platforms? How do I appear within these platforms? And how do I understand how to shift our visibility within these platforms as well? So those questions are coming up more and more regularly, more and more frequently as these platforms are growing, because naturally becoming more and more important in the way that people discover information, find information, explore, research, and dive deep into not just general information, but about brands and products as well. So naturally, there's a lot of questions just around various topics, and not least, how do we act and how do we evolve the way we operate from maybe a more traditional SEO space into people call it GEO. The reality is, it's how do we appear within this new discovery format, essentially.
Is GEO the right lingo, or is it going to change and be something else?
I think it's too early to say. I'm not interested either way. I don't think. Like, the reality is, and I think it's also fair to say, like, from a Google landscape, the boundaries between what's search and what's generative are blurring. I think I think a product and the naming of it will definitely evolve. But I actually quite like the fact that it's symbolically close to SEO in terminology, because a lot of the same concepts still maintain and still relevant. So yeah, I'm not quite personally there on adopting GEO yet, but I'm happy to embrace it if that's where we get to.
Okay. Well, in terms of what you guys have been working on, you've just launched a tool, Brand Insights AI. It's aimed at addressing, it sounds like, a lot of the questions that clients have come to you for. Can you talk to me about some of the core functionalities of the new tool?
Absolutely. So there's obviously this challenge with transparency and understanding. You're going from this world of one platform in Google and having loads of insight about how you rank, your visibility, how that changes over time, the trends. So the first part of the tool is actually just to unlock visibility for brands. So what it does is allow you to look at your brand versus a competitive set of up to 19, 20 competitors, and then review that against all of the market context that you want to. So this could be a very specific product. So if you're a car brand, you might want to look at EVs, or it could be the full breadth and depth. If you're a social media brand, then you'd want to look at the breadth and depth of the population and how they interact and prompt in this new world to discover, why they should be using social platforms, for instance. So the first step and the first part of the platform is really about unlocking that insight. And what it gives you is against those competitor set and against the prompts, and it will run hundreds of prompts across 6 large language models. So Gemini, Perplexity, Claude, DeepSeek, Grok from XAI. There's definitely one I'm missing. OpenAI is obviously ChatGPT 5 now, since that launched last week. So it gives visibility of those 6 platforms, and will show you how your brand ranks comparatively across the queries that you've selected, and show you how you rank across different platforms, if it's different on Gemini, if it's versus Claude, and then also give you, against all of those content prompts, where your gaps are in that visibility. So you might be that if you're a social app, let's say your Instagram, you will probably rank really well for social apps for Gen Z, but you probably won't rank that well for business professionals. And that will clearly be indicated in the content gaps, and it will show you essentially how the AI platforms see you. So visibility being really that critical first step to understand against the breadth of AI platforms, but also the content gaps within. That's one. Second area is actually an algorithm thing. So historically, Google, and I say historically, it continued to be an absolutely massive and critical platform, as is Gemini, as their sort of new AI mode. But I guess historically, you've kind of got one algorithm that is making decisions of the sources and understanding of authority. Whereas now, actually, you've got potentially 6, 7, 8 different AI models and platforms that have a different content ranking algorithm. So they have different sources, different logic for servicing citations. And as a result, you need visibility on actually what the sources that are powering the response from each of the platforms. That's the second bit of insight this platform gives us. It gives us insight across those 6 models, exactly the citations that are used for every single one of those responses and the URLs of those sources, which means that actually we get visibility on what's most authoritative when it comes to Grok. Surprisingly, it's X.
It's probably Elon Musk's account specifically.
It's probably a little bit of that as well. Yeah. So that would be X, but actually Gemini, YouTube is a massive source amongst the breadth and depth of other websites. And what it gives you is that visibility from a digital PR perspective, like say a more traditional SEO concept. Actually, it gives us a new insight into which sources we need to be focusing on if you want to rank or help influence potentially some of the visibility you get on these platforms.
Definitely want to get into that a little bit more in a second. You mentioned that there's sort of a lack of transparency at the moment as these platforms are building their tools My understanding is they're not necessarily forthcoming yet with any advertiser, certainly not with publishers that I've spoken with about how they're showing up in rankings. That's your understanding of what's happening as well.
Yeah, exactly that. The visibility is low, and to be honest, their first priority at the moment is about focusing on the user, displaying the right content. They're not focusing in on ads and ad spots yet, for the most part. Although I know some platforms might be dabbling, or certainly haven't taken it off the table, as they've publicly said. But there's no access to like raw data and like the volume of prompts that people are making, or those insights, and therefore there is definitely a gap of visibility on that side of things.
That would create a potential cap, at least for the short term, on potential brand investment in these, or are brands coming to you saying we don't need the visibility to know that we need to be there right now?
Yeah, I think knowing the audience shifts. So some of those numbers I've mentioned, if you look at their global rankings of URLs, like ChatGPT is the 5th largest domain on their list on the planet. It's only beaten by Facebook, YouTube, Google, Instagram, I think. I think that says something. It says that they've got a lot of eyeballs, a lot of visibility, and therefore, certainly at least right now, from an organic perspective, that's got to be a focus. And brands are definitely talking to us about, what are the implications of this? What's the visibility? How do we, what's the opportunity in this space? So, and the reality is, as a user, and actually this is, by having tools that help us understand, 25% of the UK population is currently using ChatGPT monthly. Knowing that, we know it's going to have an influence on people's perceptions of products, brands, categories, markets, and therefore it becomes important to help understand, at the very least, and influence at the very best. So while ads aren't definitely don't feel like they're on the table at the moment, I think brands recognise the importance of certainly the organic side of that space at the moment, which is where a lot of the conversation is and a lot of the focus is.
I want to talk through some of the implications of this shift in consumer behavior as well, because publishers have reported huge declines in referral traffic from search. I know Google says that somehow that isn't the case, but they also haven't shared specific data to our points earlier about transparency. So, I trust the people I've spoken with at publishers and the public statements that they've made as well. Have you seen the same phenomenon happening with your clients and their own websites?
Not to the same degree as what's reported for publishers generally. I think that's logical in the sense that think about how you interact, how you as an individual interact with those platforms. You tend to be using it for like research stages. As soon as you get into buying a product, you're definitely going to a brand or product's website. So I think the influence is slightly different at the moment. But to give you a really good example, actually, I think ChatGPT and OpenAI, they launched agent mode. I think it's called agent mode. It's formerly operator, which is essentially a tool, a browser. You can tell it to go and interact and go and shop and go and buy on a website, and it will do it basically all for you if you've given it the logins and things like that. And I'm not saying user interaction is going to go to that level, but it absolutely could influence those things in the future, which I think is, could have a much more significant impact and influence.
Just to be clear, that's a bot that buys things for you.
It is a bot that can buy things for you. Yes.
I couldn't think of anything more peak late stage capitalism, but sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. And I've not got into doing that just yet, but you
well, we should try it and see what we get delivered.
Yeah. Just get it to do stocks and shares next. And in fact, I'm pretty sure people are doing that and have done that at the moment. But anyway, so I think it's very real, by the way, that the point around how search is changing and the shift in the way metrics are appearing. From a brand perspective, I'm slightly less worried about it because I think it's more about a shift of metrics, because you are going to click less. I know I click less through on a AI mode or in Gemini or in the ChatGPT. There's less sources to click through. There's less sort of moments to click through, and I think they'll grow over time. But generally speaking, there are probably less interactions per search that's happening externally. But I think the reality is the influence of being in a position or being on that is really important for brands still. So actually, you're not losing the value by being, mentioned in that response. I think it's different for publishers. For publishers, if you didn't get, the interaction on the website, not reading the news article, or not reading the content, I think that's a much bigger issue, and actually just a really interesting topic to dive into separately. But for brands, I think it's less. It's less prominent right now, but absolutely could be a future threat.
Makes sense. So you sort of have, you have different KPIs depending on if you're a publisher or brand, right? A publisher is not going to be able to monetize visibility from an LLM delivering something that cites their work unless someone clicks to that link and then they can see who that user is and serve them an ad. Whereas a brand, it sounds like visibility might be a more important KPI going forward than maybe site visits, which are today. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, certainly for maybe more of the upper funnel moments, like research journeys and interaction journeys. It's going to be a massive challenge because there's no visibility or no metrics to be able to actually track that today. But if I was, I've got to imagine those brands will, those AI platforms will start to surface some of those metrics. We already know, actually, Google, since launching AI mode, I think within Search Console as of June of this year, they actually do surface impressions and clicks as a result of being visible around and in AI mode from a link perspective. So they are surfacing that information. They're not splitting it apart, which I think probably says something, but they're not splitting it apart at the moment. But yeah, they certainly are giving those metrics out as part of the wider package of insights I've got. And I think we'll see more of that from the other platforms eventually, because they'll want to interact with the wider ecosystem.
Does traditional search and traditional SEO, is it still relevant, or does it go away? As it sounds like, I imagine many SEO teams are suddenly really trying to pivot, trying to retrain all their staff in terms of what this new future is. You're nodding your head. Sounds like it's something that you're probably leading, and I imagine that can't be easy either.
Yeah, I actually think this is the most exciting time to be an SEO person in an SEO role. I actually think, for me, it's less about. I actually think it's more of everything that the SEO teams do, because there's more content that needs to be created. There's more content that needs to be optimized. It needs to be optimized not just for a one-track Google. It needs to be optimized for a YouTube, a Reddit, organic, as well as the AI platforms encompassing for digital PR teams. I think it's more interesting because you've suddenly got multiple algorithms to optimize to and different sources of information to influence. So I think it is a slight repivot in terms of, actually, it's not just one single source of insights that are coming in, of fueling your decisions about what content to optimize and how to optimize that content. It's actually loads of different models you now need to optimize to. And AI has definitely got a different flavor than the Google algorithms, and a different way of understanding content. So I think that's really interesting. I actually think it right now is a fantastic time to be in SEO. If you can adapt and shift to this new opportunity, I think there's absolutely loads that can be done to support brands in improving their content. And actually, a lot of the old SEO practices, a lot of the SEO practices are absolutely relevant. They just have to shift to the new insight and new recommendations.
What does the new era of optimization look like? You mentioned there's all these different types of platforms, so there's not going to be a one answer fits all. But in terms of my understanding of a lot of the big AI platforms that are the most popular, sort of ChatGPTs of the world, or Gemini, they tend to uprank trusted sort of quality publishing in terms of information from those sources, which is problematic because one could argue that they're killing those business models, and so that could sort of create a snake that eats itself. But also places like Reddit. And Reddit itself boasted at Cannes this year, their CEO Steve Huffman, that Reddit was the sort of plurality of responses that ChatGPT provided came from. What does that mean then for media companies, for the agencies, for brands? Does that mean you need to do a lot more PR suddenly? Does that mean you need to be on Reddit a lot more suddenly?
So I think the reason why Reddit is popular in terms of the AI ecosystem, a lot of the reason why I think Instagram has just started being listed within the Google ecosystem. Why X actually grew up, because it's got really valuable data sources. That user insight and data is actually, that's really valuable data. So I would say that's really interesting the AI platforms are recognizing that these sources of information are really critical to power and understand how to respond to things, which I think says something about user content in general, user generated content, and their belief that that's a valuable data set. They also are using a lot of trusted sources and information. And actually, I don't have the stats with me, but after this, I feel like I really want to dive into it, because we've done hundreds of different analysis now. And we have lots of information on all of the sources. We could probably do a bit of a insight piece that shows actually how is that ranking different from Google versus the rest, but also in terms of authority. Certainly from the data I've seen, there are hundreds of sources. It's not entirely just a Reddit or a Instagram or a X. It's more. So I think all of the digital PR practices we've historically employed are still relevant, because there's still lots of sources out there that have authority from an AI perspective as well as from an original search engine perspective. But I will say, and I will agree, that the social platforms actually have a very different role to play. I'm torn on the answer of whether brands should be influencing lots of content in those spaces. I think that's part of a wider brand strategy of how you're perceived by people, and then how they talk about your brands on those platforms. So for me, it actually makes it's marketing and how you talk about brands influences how people talk about you on social platforms, and therefore influence how you appear in those platforms, rather than necessarily going on as a brand and trying to create lots of content on a Reddit. Let's say you shouldn't do that, but I would say the user generated content is almost undoubtedly why those platforms are focusing on them, because it gives them a signal source of information that's going to appear on those platforms.
But you could understand a brand coming to you then panicked, realizing that maybe this is not a very well-liked brand among many consumers. Maybe they've had a couple bad PR crises recently. Maybe the quality of the product has dipped for who knows, various reasons. And then the AI platforms that people are using for search are reflecting that in their responses. I imagine there are plenty of people that are freaked out about that at the moment. So how do they deal with this?
I think it's the same way brands have always dealt with it. In terms of, if you've got a challenge and a public perception, and that's a PR job, it's a brand job to change perception. And only by doing that through great content as well from an SEO perspective, but certainly from a wider brand perspective, those things are always hold true. And I think you can't undo what people have written about you in the past, but what you can do is change your perception, your brand in the future. Part of that's through advertising, part of it's through how you talk about your brand, and part of it's through the content you generate, and that's how you influence it. And it's not necessarily going to be a short-term fix.
What does it mean for trust more generally? Because to be fair, I don't think most people had an understanding of SEO. They probably just trusted that Google would surface the best results, and that there wasn't sort of a science going behind what you see that everyone's fighting for. So I imagine a lot of people tended to trust the results within Google search, and or they would scroll past the maybe paid for ads to find what they're looking for. It's a little bit different when you're sort of in conversation with the bot. I feel like from a consumer standpoint, there's sort of a necessary trust bridge that needs to be built there already, which I think a lot of the AI platforms are struggling with. But if you layer on top of that the fact that maybe a brand is trying to influence in whatever ways possible, as we've just discussed, how their brand is showing up, could that erode trust?
The Google have naturally got to be in the strongest search engine, because they surfaced the content that was ultimately most useful for their users. Has always been their primary, categorizing, understanding, and surfacing like the world's information. It's been their primary job, and that's how they build trust. And I think that's exactly true for AI platforms. They'll build trust and they'll lose trust if they don't continue to be surfacing the content that's correct, truthful, authoritative, etc. So I think from like influencing it from brand's perspective, I think the reality is you can't influence it beyond truth, but you can give it the right signals that are true and are the right content. That's through technical SEO elements to make sure the information that's on your website and other places is surfaced in the right way, so it's visible and readable. So the content is authoritative and true, sourced in the right way, written from the right perspective, organized and structured in the right way, but also useful to people, like useful to individuals in their research progress. So influencing the AI in this case from a brand perspective, I think is less about, it's not about trying to trick the AI. It's about trying to surface the right kind of information that often can get lost if you don't optimize your content in the right way or don't create your content in the right way that's useful, engaging, informative, and trustful and truthful for the people. So I would come at it as it's not for brands coming to try and influence AI. It's not, I don't think it's, the goal isn't to try and influence it beyond what's reasonable and sensible. It's to allow AI platforms to understand your content in the right way and to work with all authoritative partners out there to make sure that content is surfaced in the right way. So I'll come at it from that lens, and I think the moment AI platforms don't actually surface truthful, trustful content, that's why I suspect a lot of them are grappling with how they would integrate ads as part of their services. Means that they're beholden to their users at the end of the day, and creating that trust is a relationship between them and the users as well as the wider content ecosystem.
You mentioned earlier the challenge publishers are facing, and you rightfully said that it is probably worth its own entire podcast episode.
Yeah.
If a publisher came to you as a client and was asking for your advice on how to navigate these waters, what kind of advice would you give them at the moment?
Well, that's a really tough question, isn't it? You've got a balance, right, between how opening up your content for AI to read so you can be surfaced and visible within platforms. But I get the concern and fear of potentially losing audiences because those impressions get visible on those platforms and not anywhere else. I think at the end of the day, this is how people are researching information. This is how people are starting to search information. I think the publishers that are most likely to win in the future are the ones that continue to create excellent content, continue to make it visible, whether it's a search engine or a large language model, but do so in a way that they're building trust partly through the AI platforms because they're being surfaced and referenced there. And in the long term, I think ultimately that means that people trust and use that source as a destination of interest. And I think, therefore, like the products that publishers sell is perhaps, and I'm saying this without any knowledge of this ecosystem, so I worry that I'm gonna, I'll say something that's wet. But the reality, is the business model is beyond just the information. It's how you build relationships with people, your readers, and that can still continue. And I think those things can work hand in hand. I don't think, like everything, I think it's probably been publishers and their relationship with Google has shifted a lot over many, many months, as the same with social platforms and the volume of users that come from those platforms. I think that relationship will continue to evolve with large language models. But I think the reality is, if you're a publisher, I would lean into the space because I think it's a bigger opportunity than it is a risk. Because if you're not visible on those platforms, and you potentially risk being discovered by people in the future. You probably risk your information not being surfaced in the wider AI ecosystem.
Equally, the counterpoint would be, even if you are in those places, if you are visible on AI platforms, you still can't even monetize a lot of that traffic. I mean, there won't be any traffic to monetize because people won't click through the links. So it seems a little rock and hard placey, but you still think they should lean in?
I'm optimistic that publishers can build relationships beyond that initial interaction, that initial visibility, because I do think there's and it's hard. And I don't get me wrong, and this comes into the metrics that shift. But if you think about the value of appearing in beyond a click, because I think this is the thing, you can get visibility and an AI response, and you might not click in that moment, but if your publisher is constantly mentioned and used as a source, that builds trust. It builds a sense of a relationship, I think, with readers and customers. That means in the future that they'll trust you as an authority and use the publications. But the KPI, the link between the click and the interaction is just distant. My honest answer would be, if I was a publisher, I'd also be trying to work out those links beyond just a click, because I know for a fact the volume of clicks are very low and look very low. But what no one's really measuring is, well, what's the influence of appearing or not appearing in that space? And I think if we can get some of that insight, that'd be really interesting for publishers.
It's interesting because you're advocating for what sounds like brand marketing for publishers or for brands. And we all know how notoriously difficult that is to measure, at least in the short-term effect. In some ways, that's not the direction the industry has been moving for the past several years.
Yes. Yeah. I realize I am saying exactly that. Exactly that, because it is, it's absolutely that. And it's the same way if you're Twitter or X, formerly Twitter, they would be visible on news channels, right? It's not a direct interaction. Their content is shown on those platforms, but it does build trust for the platform. It does build wider awareness and knowledge. And therefore, by being visible across all those platforms, I think you could easily argue that they grew as a platform as a result of that. I know we're talking, when you're talking about small and big and those moments, but I think that's how I would approach thinking about visibility on those platforms. Is actually, if there's if you're visible, you're mentioned, you rank well on it, I think it has a bigger impact beyond just measuring the clicks that come off of it, which is very hard to do because it's a big shift, I think, for publishers, for sure.
Final question. You said you're really excited for the future. It's an exciting time to work in SEO and that.
Yeah.
What daunts you the most about the near term?
Yeah. So, like with anything, change is hard. I know from using AI tools to build products and solutions, we used AI to build Brand Insight AI in this instance. It allowed us to build a product in 4 weeks, 8 weeks, from non-existent to actually what I think is one of the market leading tools out there at the moment. For me, that's really exciting, but it's really daunting because it means it's a shift in the way that we work, as a shift in our approach. And the hardest thing is always like, how do you get everyone on board and driving in a direction that takes advantage of this? Because I think it's the biggest opportunity that the industry has seen, in not just from SEO, just generally from a media perspective. It's the biggest opportunity I've seen in years, and that's thrilling, but it's daunting because it's a big shift. It's a big change that we need to adopt in the way that we work and the way that we adopt technology, the way that we deliver our processes and automation. Yeah, it's scary, but I'm excited about it.
Certainly, it sounds like you can move very quickly now.
Yeah, I think this is it. But also means everyone else can move quickly if they're good at it. So I just believe we can be really good at it and really quickly, which means we can move faster.
Move fast, but maybe please don't break things this time. I would appreciate it as a consumer.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Paul, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good chat.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader Podcast. Our executive producer is me, Jack Benjamin. Special thanks to our production partner, TriSonic. You can find all our episodes on the podcast platform of your choice or on our website at uk.themedialeader.com.
But do please remember to subscribe to be notified of our next episode. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at The Media Leader to receive daily coverage of all the biggest news stories in media and advertising. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm Jack Benjamin. See you next time.